All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Let's settle in, get comfy, grab a drink, and here we are. Welcome back. This is our second night of reading from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, one of the greats of American lit. And kind of where it all started. This is one of those novels that exists in the brain. Everyone has seen some sort of adaptation, some bit, some piece, and other pieces of fiction pull from this regularly. You see it all over the place. We saw the white picket fence scene, or the white fence scene, the painting and convincing the local kids that they really wanted to get in on this business. And that was even just on the first day. So, there are bits and pieces that will live rent-free in your head. So let's get to the root of some of these, shall we? Let's go ahead and continue tonight from Chapter 7. Yeah, it definitely is one of the most famous scenes in all of American lit. It's so much so that a lot of people don't even attribute it to Tom Sawyer. They just know the scene. It just exists. Alright, so I will be making an effort to tone down the bad accents tonight. It was a little extra last time. There are some that are written with the accent in the source. Those will be getting the full treatment. So enjoy that. Alright, so, Chapter 7. The harder Tom tried to fasten his mind on his book, the more his ideas wandered. So, at last, with a sigh and a yawn, he gave it up. It seemed to him that the noon recess would never come. The air was utterly dead. There was not a breath stirring. It was the sleepiest of sleepy days. The drowsing murmur of the 25 studying scholars soothed the soul like the spell that is in the murmur of bees. Away off in the flaming sunshine, Cardiff Hill lifted its soft green sides through a shimmering veil of heat, tinted with the purple of distance. A few birds floated on lazy wing high in the air. No other living thing was visible but some cows, and they were asleep. Tom's heart ached to be free, or else have something of interest to do to pass the dreary time. His hand wandered into his pocket, and his face lit up with a glow of gratitude that was a prayer, though he did not know it. Then, furtively, the percussion cap box came out. He released the tick and put him on the long, flat desk. The creature probably glowed with gratitude that amounted to a prayer too, at this moment, but it was premature. When he started thankfully to travel off, Tom turned him aside with a pin and made him take a new direction. Tom's bosom friend sat next to him, suffering just as Tom had been, and now he was deeply and gratefully interested in this entertainment in an instant. This bosom friend was Joe Harper. The two boys were sworn friends all the week and embattled enemies on Saturdays. Joe took a pin out of his lapel and began to assist in exercising the prisoner. The sport grew in interest momently. Soon, Tom said that they were interfering with each other and neither getting the fullest benefit of the tick. So he put Joe's slate on the desk and drew a line down the middle of it from top to bottom. "Now," said he, "as long as he is on your side, you can stir him up and I'll let him alone. If you let him get away and get on my side, you're to leave him alone as long as I can keep him from crossing over." "All right, go ahead, start him up." The tick escaped from Tom, present, and crossed the equator. Joe harassed him a while, and then he got away and crossed back again. This change of base occurred often. While one boy was worrying the tick with absorbing interest, the other would look on with interest as strong. The two heads bowed together over the slate, and the two souls dead to all things else. At last, luck seemed to settle and abide with Joe. The tick tried this, that, and the other course, and got as excited and as anxious as the boys themselves. But time and again, just as he would have victory in his very grasp, so to speak, and Tom's fingers would be twitching to begin, Joe's pen would deftly head him off and keep possession. At last Tom could stand it no longer. The temptation was too strong, so he reached out and lent a hand with his pen. Joe was angry. In a moment said he, "Tom, you let him alone." "I was only just to stir him up a little, Joe." "No, sir, it ain't fair. You just let him alone." "Blame it, I ain't going to stir him much." "Let him alone, I tell you." "I won't, you shall. He's on my side of the line." "Look here, Joe Harper, whose is that tick?" "I don't care whose tick he is. He's on my side of the line, and you shan't touch him." "Well, I'll just bet I will, though. He's my tick, and I'll do what I blame please with him or die." A tremendous whack came down on Tom's shoulders, and its duplicate on Joe's, and for the space of 2 minutes the dust continued to fly from the two jackets, and the whole school to enjoy it. The boys had been too absorbed to notice the hush that had stolen over the school while before, when the master came tiptoeing down the room and stood over them. He had contemplated a good part of the performance before he contributed his bit of variety to it. When school broke up at noon, Tom flew to Becky Thatcher and whispered in her ear, "Put on your bonnet and let on you're going home. And when you get to the corner, give the rest of them the slip. Turn down through the lane and come back. I'll go the other way and come it over in the same way." So the one went off with one group of scholars, and the other with another. In a little while, the two met at the bottom of the lane, and when they reached the school they had it all to themselves. Then they sat together with a slate before them, and Tom gave Becky the pencil and held her hand in his, guiding it, and so created another surprising house. When the interest in art began to wane, the two fell to talking. Tom was swimming in bliss. He said, "Do you love rats?" "No, I hate them." "Well, I do too, live ones, but I mean dead ones, to swing round your head with a string." "No, I don't care for rats much anyway. What I like is chewing gum." "Oh, I should say so. Wish I had some now." "Do you? I've got some. I'll let you chew it a while, but you must give it back to me." That was agreeable. So they chewed it turnabout, and dangled their legs against the bench in excess of contentment. They're sharing chewing gum. Oh, times were different. "Was you ever at a circus?" said Tom. "Yes, and my pa's going to take me again sometime, if I'm good." "I've been to the circus 3 or 4 times, lots of times. Church ain't shucks to a circus. There's things going on at a circus all the time. I'm going to be a clown in a circus when I grow up." "Oh, you are? That'll be nice. You're so lovely. Oh, they're so lovely, all spotted up." "Yes, that's so. And they get slathers of money, most $1 a day. Ben Rogers says, Say, Becky, was you ever engaged?" "What's that? Why, engaged to be married?" "No." "Would you like to?" "I reckon so. I don't know. What's it like?" "Like? Why, it ain't like anything. You only just tell a boy you won't ever have anybody but him, ever, 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 and then you kiss, and that's all. Anybody can do it." "Kiss? What do you kiss for?" "Why, that, you know, is to, well, they always do that." "Everybody?" "Why, yes, everybody. That's in love with each other. Do you remember what I wrote on the slate?" Yes." "What was it?" "I shan't tell you." "Shall I tell you?" Yes, but some other time." "No, now." "No, not now. Tomorrow." "Oh, no, now. Please, Becky. I'll whisper it ever so easy." Becky hesitating. Tom took silence for consent, and passed his arm about her waist and whispered the tale ever so softly, with his mouth close to her ear. Then he added, "Now you whisper it to me, just the same." She resisted, for a while, and then said, "You turn your face away so you can't see, and then I will, but you mustn't ever tell anybody." Will you, Tom? Now, you won't, will you? No, indeed I won't. Now, Becky. He turned his face away. She bent timidly around till her breath stirred his curls and whispered, I love you. Then she sprang away and ran around and around the desks and benches with Tom after her, and took refuge in a corner at last, with her little white apron to her face. Tom clasped her around her neck and pleaded, Now, Becky, it's all done, all over but the kiss. Don't you be afraid of that. It ain't anything at all. Please, Becky. And he tugged at her apron and hands. Boy's a pest. By and by, she gave up and let her hands drop. Her face, all glowing with the struggle, came up and submitted. Tom kissed those red lips and said, Now it's all done, Becky. And always after this, you know, you ain't ever to love anybody but me. You ain't ever to marry anybody but me. Ever, never, and forever. Will you? No. I'll never love anybody but you, Tom. Never marry anybody but you. You ain't to ever marry anybody but me either. Certainly, of course. That's part of it. And always coming to school, or when you're going home, you're to walk with me, when there ain't anybody looking. And you choose me, and I choose you at parties. Because that's the way you do when you're engaged. It's so nice. I never heard of it before. Oh, it's ever so gay. Why, me and Amy Lawrence. The big eyes told Tom his blunder, and he stopped, confused. Oh, Tom, then I ain't the first you've ever been engaged to? The child began to cry. Tom said, Oh, don't cry, Becky. I don't care for her anymore. Yes, you do, Tom. You know you do. Tom tried to put his arm about her neck, but she pushed him away and turned her face to the wall and went on crying. Tom tried again with soothing words in his mouth and was repulsed again. Then his pride was up, and he strode away and went outside. He stood about, restless and uneasy for a while, glancing at the door, every now and then hoping she would repent and come to find him, but she did not. Then he began to feel badly and fear that he was in the wrong. It was a hard struggle for him to make new advances now, but he nerved himself to it and entered. She was still standing back there in the corner, sobbing, with her face to the wall. Tom's heart smote him. He went to her and stood a moment, not knowing exactly how to proceed. Then he said, hesitatingly, Becky, I don't care for anybody but you. No reply, but sobs. Becky, pleadingly, Becky, won't you say something? More sobs. Tom got out his chiefest jewel, a brass knob from the top of an andiron, and passed it around her so that she could see it, and said, Please, Becky, won't you take it? She struck it to the floor. Then Tom marched out of the house and over the hills and far away, to return to school no more that day. Presently, Becky began to suspect. She ran to the door. He was not in sight. She flew around to the play yard, and he was not there. Then she called, Tom! Come back, Tom! She listened intently, but there was no answer. She had no companions but silence and loneliness. So she sat down to cry again and upbraid herself, and by this time the scholars began to gather again. She had to hide her griefs and still her broken heart, and take up the cross of a long, dreary, aching afternoon, with none among the strangers about her to exchange sorrows with. Yeah, the boy is definitely immense. That's interesting. So, once again, that last message of yours does not show up on the log in the YouTube or on the monitor stream, but it does show up on the plugin. So I wonder if it's an auto mod going on there again. I don't know what it would pull off, though. Is it not like Menace? Huh, I don't know. That's weird. But yeah, Keep in mind that Tom is 10 years old. Already a heartbreaker twice over. At least. Well, that one just went through fine. Let's try it over here. I think it might not like Menace. Something. Yeah, from monitor stream it comes up just fine on the view, but it does not come through on the actual YouTube. So it's something is getting filtered there. That's interesting. Very interesting indeed. Actually, I need to wonder. There's no moderation activity shown. Huh. Ah, well, best not think on it too hard. And that's why we've got on-stream chat. On-screen chat. Alright, so let's continue with Chapter 8. Tom dodged hither and thither through the lanes until he was well out of the back of returning scholars, and then fell into a moody jog. He crossed a small branch 2 or 3 times, because of a prevailing juvenile superstition that to cross water baffled pursuit. Half an hour later, he was disappearing behind the Douglas mansion on the summit of Cardiff Hill, and the schoolhouse was hardly distinguishable away off in the valley behind him. He entered a dense wood, picked his pathless way to the center of it, and sat down on a mossy spot under a spreading oak. There was not even a zephyr stirring. The dead noonday heat had oft even stilled the songs of the birds. Nature lay in a trance that was broken by no sound but the occasional far-off hammering of a woodpecker, and this seemed to render the pervading silence and sense of loneliness the more profound. The boy's soul was steeped in melancholy. His feelings were in happy accord with his surroundings. He sat long, with his elbow on his knees and his chin in his hands, meditating. It seemed to him that life was but a trouble at best, and he more than half envied Jimmy Hodges, so lately released. It must be very peaceful, he thought, to lie and slumber and dream for ever and ever, with the wind whispering through the trees and caressing the grass and the flowers over the grave, and nothing to bother and grieve about, ever any more. If he only had a clean Sunday school record, he could be willing to go and be done with it all. Now, as to this girl, what had he done? Nothing. He had met the best in the world, and been treated like a dog, like a very dog. She should be sorry someday, maybe when it was too late. If he could only die temporarily. The elastic heart of youth cannot be compressed into one constrained shape long at a time. Tom presently began to drift insensibly back into the concerns of this life again. What if he turned his back now, and disappeared mysteriously? What if he went away, ever so far away, into unknown countries beyond the seas, and never came back any more? How would she feel then? The idea of being a clown recurred to him now, only to fill him with disgust, for frivolity and jokes and spotted tights were an offense, when they intruded themselves upon a spirit that was exalted into the vague, august realm of the romantic. No, he would be a soldier, return after long years all war-worn and illustrious. No, better still, he would join the Indians and hunt buffaloes and go on the warpath in the mountain ranges and the trackless great plains of the far west, and away, in the future, come back a great chief, bristling with feathers, hideous with paint, and prance into Sunday school some drowsy summer morning with a blood-curdling war whoop, and sear the eyeballs of all his companions with unappeasable envy. But no, there was something gaudier even than this. He would be a pirate. Yes, that was it. Now his future lay plain before him, and glowing with unimaginable splendor. How his name would fill the world, and make people shudder. How gloriously he would go plowing the dancing seas in his long, low, black-hulled racer, the spirit of the storm, with his grisly flag flying at the fore, and at the zenith of his fame, how he would suddenly appear at the old village and stalk into church, brown and weather-beaten, in his black velvet doublet and trunks, his great jack boots, his crimson sash, his belt bristling with horse pistols, his crime-rusted cutlass at his side, his slouch hat with waving plumes, his black flag unfurled with a skull and crossbones on it, and here, with swelling ecstasy, the whisperings, "It's Tom Sawyer the pirate, the Black Avenger of the Spanish Main." Yes, it was settled. His career was determined. He would run away from home and enter upon it. He would start the very next morning. Therefore, he must now begin to get ready. He would collect his resources together. He went to a rotten log near at hand and began to dig under one end of it with his Barlow knife. He soon struck wood that sounded hollow. He put his hand there and uttered this incantation impressively. "What hasn't come here, come. What's here, stay here." Then he scraped away the dirt and exposed a pine shingle. He took it up and disclosed a shapely little treasure house, whose bottom and sides were of shingles. In it lay a marble. Tom's astonishment was boundless. He scratched his head with a perplexed air and said, "Well, that beats anything." Then he tossed the marble away pettishly and stood cogitating. The truth was that a superstition of his had failed here, which he and all his comrades had always looked upon as infallible. If you buried a marble with certain necessary incantations and left it alone a fortnight, and then opened the place with the incantation he had just used, he would find that all the marbles you had ever lost had gathered themselves together there. Meantime, no matter how widely they had been separated, but now this thing had actually and unquestionably failed. Tom's whole structure of faith was shaken to its foundations. He had many a time heard of this thing succeeding, but never of it failing before. It did not occur to him that he had tried it several times before himself, but could never find the hiding places afterward. He puzzled over the matter some time, and finally decided that some witch had interfered and broken the charm. He thought he would satisfy himself on that point, so he searched around till he found a small sandy spot with a little funnel-shaped depression in it. He laid himself down and put his mouth close to this depression and called, "Doodlebug, Doodlebug, tell me what I want to know. Doodlebug, Doodlebug, tell me what I want to know." The sand began to work, and presently a small black bug appeared for a second, and then darted under again in a fright. He doesn't tell. So it was a witch that done it. Just knowed it. He well knew the futility of trying to contend against witches, so he gave up, discouraged. But it occurred to him that he might as well have the marble he had just thrown away, and therefore he went and made a patient search for it. But he could not find it. Now he went back to his treasure house and carefully placed himself just as it had been standing when he tossed the marble away. Then he took another marble from his pocket and tossed it in the same way, saying, "Brother, go find your brother." He watched where it stopped, went there and looked. But it must have fallen short or gone too far, so he tried twice more. The last repetition was successful. The two marbles lay within a foot of each other. Just here, the blast of a toy tin trumpet came faintly down the green aisles of the forest. Tom flung off his jacket and trousers, turned a suspender into a belt, raked away some brush behind the rotten log, disclosing a rude bow and arrow, a lath sword and tin trumpet, and in a moment had seized these things and bounded away, bare-legged, with a fluttering shirt. He presently halted under a great elm, blew an answering blast, and then began to tiptoe and look warily out, this way and that. He said cautiously to an imaginary company, "Hold, my merry men! Keep hid till I blow." Now appeared Joe Harper, as airily clad and elaborately armed as Tom. Tom called, "Ho! Who comes here into Sherwood Forest without my pass?" "Guy Geesmore wants no man's pass. What art thou that dares to hold such language?" said Tom, prompting, for they talked by the book from memory. "Who art thou that dares to hold such language?" "I, indeed, am Robin Hood, as thy caitiff carcass soon shall know." "Then art thou indeed that famous outlaw. Right gladly will I dispute with thee the passes of the merry wood. Have at thee." They took their lathe swords, dumped their other traps on the ground, struck a fencing attitude, foot to foot, and began a grave, careful combat. "Two up, two down," presently Tom said. "Now, if you've got the hang, go at it lively." So they went it lively, panting and perspiring with the work. By and by, Tom shouted, "Fall! Fall! Why don't you fall?" "I shan't. Why don't you fall yourself? You're getting the worst of it." "Why, that ain't anything. I can't fall. That ain't the way it is in the book. The book says, 'Then with one backhanded stroke he slew poor Guy Geesmore.' You're to turn around and let me hit you in the back." There was no getting around the authorities. So Joe turned, received the whack, and fell. "Now," said Joe, getting up, "you got to let me kill you. That's fair." "Why, I can't do that. It ain't in the book." "Well, it blame mean, that's all." "Well, say, Joe, you can be Friar Tuck, or Much, the miller's son, and lam me with a quarterstaff, or I'll be the sheriff of Nottingham, and you be Robin Hood a little while and kill me." This was satisfactory, and so these adventures were carried out. Then Tom became Robin Hood again, and was allowed by the treacherous nun to bleed his strength away through his neglected wound. And at last, Joe represented a whole tribe of weeping outlaws, dragged him sadly forth, gave his bow into his feeble hands, and Tom said, "Where this arrow falls, there bury poor Robin Hood under the greenwood tree." Then he shot the arrow, and fell back, and would have died, but he lit on a nettle, and sprang up too gaily for a corpse. The boys dressed themselves, hid their accoutrements, and went off grieving that there were no outlaws any more, and wondering what modern civilization could claim to have done to compensate for their loss. They said they would rather be outlaws a year in Sherwood Forest than President of the United States forever. That brings us to the end of Chapter 8. A little bit of perfectly good, boyish make-believe there. I think most of us have had sort of antics and japeries like that of our own. So, that's fun. I think we mentioned it last time. The times don't really change all that much. Kids are kids forever. All right, let's continue now with Chapter 9. At 9:30 that night, Tom and Sid were sent to bed, as usual. They said their prayers, and Sid was soon asleep. Tom lay awake and waited, in restless impatience. When it seemed to him that it must be nearly daylight, he heard the clock strike 10. This was despair. He would have tossed and fidgeted, as his nerves demanded, but he was afraid he might wake Sid, so he lay still and stared up into the dark. Everything was dismally still. By and by, out of the stillness, little, scarcely perceptible noises began to emphasize themselves. The ticking of the clock began to bring itself into notice. Old beams began to crack mysteriously. The stairs creaked faintly. Evidently, spirits were abroad. A measured, muffled snore issued from Aunt Polly's chamber, and now the tiresome chirping of a cricket that no human ingenuity could locate began. Next, the ghastly ticking of a death watch in the wall at the bed's head made Tom shudder. It meant that somebody's days were numbered. Then the howl of a far-off dog rose on the night air and was answered by a fainter howl from a remoter distance. Tom was in an agony. At last he was satisfied that time had ceased and eternity begun. He began to doze, in spite of himself. The clock chimed 11, but he did not hear it. And then there came, mingling with his half-formed dreams, a most melancholy caterwauling. The raising of a neighboring window disturbed him. A cry of "Scat, you devil!" and the crash of an empty bottle against the back of his aunt's woodshed brought him wide awake. And a single minute later, he was dressed and out of the window and creeping along the roof of the L on all fours. He meowed with caution once or twice as he went, then jumped to the roof of the woodshed and thence to the ground. Huckleberry Finn was there, with his dead cat. The boys moved off and disappeared in the gloom. At the end of half an hour, they were wading through the tall grass of the graveyard. It was a graveyard of the old-fashioned western kind. It was on a hill about 1.5 miles from the village. It had a crazy board fence around it, which leaned inward in places, and outward the rest of the time, but stood upright nowhere. Grass and weeds grew rank over the whole cemetery. All the old graves were sunken in. There was not a tombstone on the place, round-topped, worm-eaten boards staggered over the graves, leaning for support and finding none. Sacred to the memory of so-and-so had been painted on them once, but it could no longer have been read on most of them. Now, even if there had been light, a faint wind moaned through the trees, and Tom feared it might be the spirits of the dead, complaining at being disturbed. The boys talked little, and only under their breath, for the time and the place and the pervading solemnity and silence oppressed their spirits. They found the sharp new heap they were seeking, and ensconced themselves within the protection of 3 great elms that grew in a bunch within a few feet of the grave. Then they waited in silence for what seemed a long time. The hooting of a distant owl was all the sound that troubled the dead stillness. Tom's reflections grew oppressive. He must force some talk, so he said in a whisper, "Hucky, do you believe the dead people like it for us to be here?" Huckleberry whispered, "I wished I knowed. It's awful solemn like, ain't it?" "I bet it is." There was a considerable pause, while the boys canvassed this matter inwardly. Then Tom whispered, "Say, Hucky, do you reckon Hoss Williams hears us talking?" "Of course he does. At least his spirit does." Tom, after a pause, "I wish I'd said Mr. Williams. But I never meant any harm. Everybody calls him Hoss." "Bonnie can't be too particular about how they talk about these your dead people, Tom." Okay. Huck is written that way, and is actually bringing to mind Joseph. Was it Joseph? From Wuthering Heights. Just making sense of the words in the page can be a challenge sometimes with him. This was a damper, and conversation died again. Presently, Tom seized his comrade's arm and said, "Shh! What is it, Tom?" And the two clung together with beating hearts. "Shh! There it is again! Didn't you hear it?" There! Now you hear it. "Lord, Tom, they're coming! They're coming sure! What'll we do?" "I don't know. Think they'll see us?" "Oh, Tom, they can see in the dark, same as cats. I wish I hadn't come." "Oh, don't be feared. I don't believe they'll bother us. We ain't doing any harm. We sit perfectly still. Maybe they won't notice us at all." I'll try to, Tom, but Lord, I'm all a-shiver. Listen." The boys bent their heads together and scarcely breathed. A muffled sound of voices floated up from the far end of the graveyard. "Look! See there!" whispered Tom. "What is it?" "It's devil fire. Oh, Tom, this is awful." Some vague figures approached through the gloom, swinging an old-fashioned tin lantern that freckled the ground with innumerable little specks of light. Presently, Huckleberry whispered with a shudder, "It's the devil, sure enough. 3 of 'em. Lordy, Tom, I'm goners. Can you pray?" "I'll try, but don't you be afeard. They ain't gonna hurt us. Now, I lay me down to sleep. Shh! What is it, Huck?" "They're humans. One of 'em is, anyway. One of 'em's old Muff Potter's voice." "No, 'tain't so, is it?" "I bet I know it. Don't you stir nor budge. He ain't sharp enough to notice us. Drunk the same as usual, likely. A blamed old rip." "All right, I'll keep still. Now they're stuck. Can't find it. Here they come again. Now they're hot, cold again, hot again, red hot. They're painted right this time. Say, Huck, I know another of them voices. It's Injun Joe." "That's so. That murdering half-breed. I'd druther they was devils a dern sight. What could they be up to?" The whispering died wholly out now, for the 3 men had reached the grave and stood within a few feet of the boy's hiding place. "Here it is," said the third voice, and the owner of it held the lantern up and revealed the face of young Dr. Robinson. Potter and Injun Joe were carrying a handbarrow with a rope and a couple of shovels in it. They cast down their load and began to open the grave. The doctor put the lantern on at the head of the grave and came and sat down with his back against one of the elm trees. It was so close the boys could have touched him. "Hurry, men," he said in a low voice. "The moon might come out at any moment." They growled a response and went on digging. For some time there was no noise but the grating sound of the spades discharging their freight of mold and gravel. It was very monotonous. Finally, a spade struck upon the coffin with a dull, woody accent, and within another minute or two the men had hoisted it out on the ground. They pried off the lid with their shovels, got out the body, and dumped it rudely on the ground. The moon drifted from behind the clouds and exposed the pallid face. The barrow was got ready, and the corpse placed on it, covered with a blanket, and bound to its place with the rope. Potter took out a large spring knife and cut off the dangling end of the rope, and then said, "Now the cuss thing's ready. Sawbones and you'll just out with another 5, or here she stays." "There's the dog," said Injun Joe. "Look here, what does this mean? You required your pay in advance, and I've paid you." "Yes, you done more than that," said Injun Joe, approaching the doctor, who was now standing. "5 years ago, you drove me away from your father's kitchen one night, and I come to ask for something to eat. And you said I wasn't there for any good. And when I swore I'd get even with you if it took 100 years, your father had me jailed for a vagrant. Did you think I'd forget? The Injun blood ain't in me for nothing. And now I got you. And you got to settle, you know?" He was threatening the doctor, with his fist in his face. By this time, the doctor struck out suddenly and stretched the ruffian on the ground. Potter dropped his knife and exclaimed, "Here now, don't you hit my pod!" And the next moment, he had grappled with the doctor, and the two were struggling with might and main, trampling the grass and tearing the ground with their heels. Injun Joe sprang to his feet, his eyes flaming with passion, snatched up Potter's knife, and went creeping, cat-like and stooping, round and round about the combatants, seeking an opportunity. All at once, the doctor flung himself free, seized the heavy headboard of William's grave, and felled Potter to the earth with it. And in the same instant, the half-breed saw his chance and drove the knife to the hilt in the young man's breast. He reeled and fell, partly upon Potter, flooding him with his blood. And in the same moment, clouds blotted out the dreadful spectacle. The 2 frightened boys went speeding away in the dark. Presently, when the moon emerged again, Injun Joe was standing over the 2 forms, contemplating them. The doctor murmured inarticulately, gave a long gasp or two, and was still. The half-breed muttered, "That score is settled. Damn you." Then he robbed the body, after which he put the fatal knife in Potter's open right hand and sat down on the dismantled coffin. 3, 4, 5 minutes passed, and then Potter began to stir and moan. His hand closed upon the knife. He raised and glanced at it, and let it fall, with a shudder. Then he sat up, pushing the body from him, and gazed at it, and then around him, confusedly. His eyes met Joe's. "Lord, how is this, Joe?" he said. "It's a dirty business," said Joe, without moving. "What did you do it for?" I never done it." "Look here, that kind of talk won't wash." Potter trembled and grew white. "I thought I got sober. I had no business to drink tonight, but it's in my head yet. Worse than when we started here. I'm all in a muddle. Can't recollect anything of it. Hardly. Tell me, Joe, honest now, old feller, did I do it?" "Joe, I never meant to. Upon my soul and honor, I never meant to, Joe. Tell me how it was, Joe. Oh, it's awful. I'm so young and promising." "Why, you two were scuffling. He fetched you one with the headboard, and you fell flat. And then up you come, all reeling and staggering like. Snatched the knife and jammed it into him, just as he fetched you another off clip. Here you've laid, dead as a wedge till now." "Oh, I didn't know what I was a-doing. Wish I may die this minute if I did. It was all on account of the whiskey and the excitement, I reckon. I never used a weapon in my life before, Joe. I fought, but never with weapons. They'll all say that, Joe. Don't tell." "Say you won't tell, Joe? That's a good fellow. I always liked you, Joe, and stood up for you, too. Don't you remember? You won't tell, will you, Joe?" And the poor creature dropped on his knees before the stolid murderer and clasped his appealing hands. "Nope. You've always been fair and square with me, Muff Potter, and I won't go back on you. There now, that's as fair as a man can say." "Oh, Joe, you're an angel. I'll bless you for this the longest day I live." Potter began to cry. "Come now, that's enough of that. This ain't any time for blubbering. You be on yonder way, and I'll go this. Move now, and don't leave any tracks behind you." Potter started on a trot that quickly increased to a run. The half-breed stood looking after him. He muttered, "If he's as much stunned with the lick and fuddled with the rum as he had the look of being, he won't think of the knife till he's gone so far he'll be afraid to come back after it. Such a place by himself. Chicken heart." 2 or 3 minutes later, the murdered man, the blanketed corpse, and the lidless coffin in the open grave were under no inspection but the moon's. The stillness was complete again, too. That brings us to the end of chapter 9. This is another scene, one of those scenes that is important and people remember a lot, but it's not nearly so much as the fence. This is one that is covered up quite frequently in the different adaptations in different ways. And Injun Joe obviously becomes an important character. Muff Potter was sadly just the dupe in all this, but we'll see how things come out. But of course, no one knows that there were 2 witnesses to this. One, the village scamp, and the other, the pariah, Huckleberry Finn. So, we'll have to see what comes of this, how the boys react, and what sort of trouble they get up to, because there's no way this happens and there can be any lack of repercussions. So let's continue with chapter 10. The 2 boys flew on and on toward the village, speechless with horror, then glanced backward over their shoulders from time to time, apprehensively, as if they feared they might be followed. Every stump that started up their path seemed a man and an enemy, and made them catch their breath. And as they sped by some outlying cottages that lay near the village, the barking of the aroused watchdogs seemed to give wings to their feet. "If only we can Get to the old tannery before we break down, whispered Tom, in short catches between breaths. I can't stand it much longer. Huckleberry's hard pantings were his only reply, and the boys fixed their eyes on the goal of their hopes and bent to their work to win it. They gained steadily on it, and at last, breast to breast, they burst through the open door and fell, grateful and exhausted, in the sheltering shadows beyond. By and by, their pulses slowed down, and Tom whispered, Huckleberry, what do you reckon will come of this? If Dr. Robinson dies, I reckon hanging will come of it. Do you, though? Why, I know it, Tom. Tom thought a while, then he said, Who'll tell? We? What are you talking about? Suppose something happened and Injun Joe didn't hang? Why, he'd kill us sometime or other, just as dead sure as we are laying here. That's just what I was thinking of myself, Huck. If anybody tells, let Muff Potter do it. If he's fool enough, he's generally drunk enough. Tom said nothing, went on thinking. Presently, he whispered, Huck, Muff Potter don't know it. How can he tell? What's the reason he don't know it? Because he just got that whack when Injun Joe done it. Do you reckon he could see anything? Do you reckon he knowed anything? Bah, hokey, that's so, Tom. And besides, looky here. Maybe that whack done for him. Nah, 'tain't likely, Tom. He had liquor in him. I could see that, and besides, he always has. Well, when Pap's full, you might take and belt him over the head with a church, and you wouldn't faze him. He says so, his own self. It's the same with Muff Potter, of course. But if a man was dead sober, I reckon maybe that whack might fetch him. I don't know. And then another reflective silence. Tom said, Hucky, you sure you can keep mum? Tom, we got to keep mum. You know that. That Injun devil wouldn't make any more of a drowning us than a couple of cats. If we was to squeak about this and they didn't hang him. Now, looky here, Tom. Let's take and swear to one another. That's what we got to do. Swear to keep mum. I'm agreed. It's the best thing. Would you just hold hands and swear that we... Oh, no, that wouldn't do for this. That's good enough for a little rubbishy common thing, especially with gals, because they go back on you anyway, and blab if they get in a huff. But there ought to be right about a big thing like this, and blood. Tom's whole being applauded this idea. It was deep and dark and awful. The hour, the circumstances, the surroundings were in keeping with it. He picked up a clean pine shingle that lay in the moonlight, took a little fragment of red keel out of his pocket, got the moon on his work, and painfully scrawled these lines, emphasizing each slow downstroke by clamping his tongue between his teeth and letting up the pressure on the upstrokes. Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer swears they will keep mum about this, and they wish they may drop down dead in their tracks if they ever tell and rot. Huckleberry was filled with admiration of Tom's facility in writing, the sublimity of his language. He at once took a pin from his lapel and was going to prick his flesh, but Tom said, Hold on, don't do that. The pin's brass. It might have verdigris on it. Was verdigris? It's poison. That's what it is. You just swallow some at once, you'll see. So Tom unwound the thread from one of his needles, and each boy pricked the ball of his thumb and squeezed out a drop of blood. In time, after many squeezes, Tom managed to sign his initials, using the ball of his little finger for a pen. Then he showed Huckleberry how to make an H and an F, and the oath was complete. They buried the shingle close to the wall, with some dismal ceremonies and incantations, and the fetters that bound their tongues were considered to be locked and the key thrown away. A figure crept stealthily through a break in the other end of the ruined building now, but they did not notice it. Tom, whispered Huckleberry, does this keep us from ever telling? Always? Of course it does. It don't make any difference what happens. We just got to keep mum. We drop down dead, don't you know it? Yes, I reckon that's so. They continued to whisper for some little time. Presently, a dog set up a long, lugubrious howl just outside, within 10 feet of them. The boys clasped each other suddenly in an agony of fright. "Which of us does he mean?" gasped Huckleberry. "I don't know. Peep through the crack, quick!" "No, you, Tom! I can't do it, Huck!" "Please, Tom, there it is again!" "Oh, Lordy, I'm thankful," whispered Tom. "I know his voice. It's Bull Harbison." "Oh, that's good. I tell you, Tom, I was most scared to death. I'd have bet anything it was a stray dog." The dog howled again. The boy's heart sank once more. "Oh, my. That ain't no Bull Harbison," whispered Huckleberry. "Do, Tom." Tom, quaking with fear, yielded and put his eye to the crack. His whisper was hardly audible when he said, "Oh, Huck, it's a stray dog." "Quick, Tom, quick! What does he mean?" "Huck, he must mean us both. We're right together." "Oh, Tom, I reckon we're goners. I reckon there ain't no mistake about where I'll go to. I've been so wicked." "Dad, fetch it. This comes of playing hooky, doing everything a feller's not told not to do. It might have been good, like Sid, if I'd have tried, but no, I wouldn't, of course. If I ever get off this time, I lay I'll just waller in Sunday schools." And Tom began to snuffle a little. "You bad!" And Huckleberry began to snuffle too. "Confound it, Tom Sawyer, you just old pie, longside of what I am. Oh, Lordy, I wished I only had half your chance." Tom choked off and whispered, "Look, Hooky, look. He's got his back to us." Hooky looked with joy in his heart. "Well, he has. By jingoes, did he before?" "Yes, he did, but I, like a fool, never thought. Oh, this is bully, you know. Now, who can he mean?" The howling stopped. Tom pricked up his ears. "Shh! What's that?" he whispered. "Sounds like hogs grunting. No, it's somebody snoring, Tom." "That it is. Whereabouts is it, Huck?" "I believe it's down at the other end. Sounds so anyway. Pap used to sleep there sometimes, along with the hogs, but laws bless you, he just lifts things when he snows. Besides, I reckon he ain't ever coming back to this town anymore." The spirit of adventure rose in the boys' souls once more. "Hucky, do you dast to go if I lead?" "I don't much like to, Tom. Suppose it's Injun Joe." Tom quailed, but presently the temptation rose up strong again, and the boys agreed to try, with the understanding that they would take to their heels if the snoring stopped. So they went tiptoeing stealthily down, the one behind the other. When they had gone to within 5 steps of the snorer, Tom stepped on a stick, and it broke with a sharp snap. The man moaned, writhed a little, and his face came into the moonlight. It was Muff Potter. The boys' hearts had stood still, and their hopes too, when the man moved. But their fears passed away now. They tiptoed out, through the broken weatherboarding, and stopped at a little distance to exchange a parting word. That long, lugubrious howl rose on the night air again. They turned and saw the strange dog standing within a few feet of where Potter was lying, and facing Potter, with his nose pointing heavenward. "Oh, Jiminy, it's him!" exclaimed both boys in a breath. "Say, Tom, they say a stray dog come howling around Jimmy Miller's house about midnight, as much as 2 weeks ago, and a whippoorwill came and lit on one of the banisters and sung the very same evening, and there ain't anybody dead there yet." "Well, I know that, and I suppose there ain't. Didn't Gracie Miller fall in the kitchen fire and burn herself terribly the very next Sunday?" "Yes, but she ain't dead. And what's more, she's getting better, too." "All right. You wait and see. She's a goner. Just as dead sure as Muff Potter's a goner." "That's what the Negroes say. They know all these kinds of things, Huck." Then they separated, cogitating. When Tom crept in at his bedroom window the night it was almost spent, he undressed with excessive caution, and fell asleep congratulating himself that nobody knew of his escapade. He was not aware that the gently snoring Sid was awake, and had been so for an hour. When Tom awoke, Sid was dressed and gone. There was a late look in the light, a late sense in the atmosphere. He was startled. Why had he not been called? Persecuted till he was up, as usual. The thought filled him with bodings. Within 5 minutes, he was dressed and downstairs, feeling sore and drowsy. The family were still at table, but they had finished breakfast. There was no voice of rebuke. But there were averted eyes. There was a silence and an air of solemnity that struck a chill to the culprit's heart. He sat down and tried to seem gay, but it was uphill work. It roused no smile, no response, and he lapsed into silence, and let his heart sink down to the depths. After breakfast, his aunt took him aside, and Tom almost brightened in the hope that he was going to be flogged, but it was not so. His aunt wept over him and asked him how he could go and break her old heart so, and finally told him to go on and ruin himself and bring her gray hairs with sorrow to the grave, for it was no use for her to try any more. This was worse than 1,000 whippings. Tom's heart was sorer now than his body. He cried, he pleaded for forgiveness, promised to reform over and over again, and then received his dismissal, feeling that he had won but an imperfect forgiveness, and established but a feeble confidence. He left the presence too miserable to even feel revengeful toward Sid, and so the latter's prompt retreat through the back gate was unnecessary. He moped to school gloomy and sad, and took his flogging, along with Joe Harper, for playing hooky the day before, with the air of one whose heart was busy with heavier woes and wholly dead to trifles. Then he betook himself to his seat, rested his elbows on his desk, and his jaws in his hands, and stared at the wall with the stony stare of suffering that has reached the limit and can no further go. His elbow was pressing against some hard substance. After a while, after a long time, he slowly and sadly changed his position and took up this object with a sigh. It was a paper. He unrolled it. A long, lingering, colossal sigh followed, and his heart broke. It was his brass and iron knob. This final feather broke the camel's back. That is the end of chapter 10. And we come to a decent time to go ahead and take a short break. So go ahead and top up your drinks, stretch your legs, and we'll be back in just a little while to continue the Adventures of Tom Sawyer from chapter 11. All right, we are back. So, let's go ahead and jump back into things. This was a big chapter. It's the sort of starting of things actually moving. But until now, it's been almost all just setting the stage and introducing the characters and getting a feel for life in this small, quiet little village. But now things have changed, and now that things are in motion, we'll see where they will lead. So, exactly, yeah, this is just sort of setting everything up. And yeah, it's a good little bit of world building there. But now the plot is afoot. So let's see how things develop from here. So we continue now with chapter 11. Close upon the hour of noon, the whole village was suddenly electrified with the ghastly news. No need of the as yet undreamed of telegraph. The tale flew from man to man, from group to group, from house to house, with little less than telegraphic speed. Of course, the schoolmaster gave holiday for that afternoon. The town would have thought strangely of him if he had not. A gory knife had been found close to the murdered man, and it had been recognized by somebody as belonging to Muff Potter. So the story ran, and it was said that a belated citizen had come upon Potter washing himself in the branch about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and that Potter had at once sneaked off. Suspicious circumstances, especially the washing, which was not a habit with Potter. It was also said that the town had been ransacked for this murderer. The public are not slow in the matter of sifting evidence and arriving at a verdict. But that he could not be found. Horsemen had departed down all the roads in every direction, and the sheriff was confident that he would be captured before night. All the town was drifting toward the graveyard. Tom's heartbreak vanished, and he joined the procession, not because he would not 1,000 times rather go anywhere else, but because an awful, unaccountable fascination drew him on. Arrived at the dreadful place, he wormed his small body through the crowd, and saw the dismal spectacle. It seemed to him an age since he was there before. Somebody pinched his arm. He turned, and his eyes met Huckleberry's. Then both looked elsewhere at once, and wondered if anybody had noticed anything in their mutual glance. But everybody was talking, and intent upon the grisly spectacle before him. Poor fellow, poor young fellow, this ought to be a lesson to grave robbers. Muff Potter will hang for this if they catch him. This was the drift of remark, and the minister said it was a judgment. His hand is here. Now, Tom shivered from head to heel. His eye fell upon the stolid face of Injun Joe. At this moment, the crowd began to sway and struggle, and voices shouted, "It's him! It's him! He's coming himself!" Who? Who? From 20 voices. Muff Potter! Hello! He's stopped! Look out, he's turning! Don't let him get away! People in the branches of the trees over Tom's head said he wasn't trying to get away. He only looked doubtful and perplexed. "Infernal impudence," said a bystander. "Wanted to come and take a quiet look at his work, I reckon. Didn't expect any company." The crowd fell apart. Now, and the sheriff came through, ostentatiously leading Potter by the arm. The poor fellow's face was haggard, and his eyes showed the fear that was upon him. When he stood before the murdered man, he shook as with a palsy. He put his face in his hands and burst into tears. "I didn't do it, friends," he sobbed. "Upon my word and honor, I never done it." "Who's accused you?" shouted a voice. This shot seemed to carry home. Potter lifted his face and looked around him with a pathetic hopelessness in his eyes. He saw Injun Joe and exclaimed, "Oh, Injun Joe, You promised me you'd never... Is that your knife? And it was thrust before him by the sheriff. Potter would have fallen if they had not caught him and eased him to the ground. Then he said, "Something told me if I didn't come back and get..." He shuddered, then waved his nerveless hand with a vanquished gesture and said, "Tell him, Joe, tell him. It ain't any use anymore." Then Huckleberry and Tom stood dumb and staring, and heard the stony-hearted liar reel off his serene statement. They expected every moment that the clear sky would deliver God's lightnings upon his head, and wondering to see how long the stroke was delayed. When he had finished, and still stood alive and whole, their wavering impulse to break their oath and save the poor betrayed prisoner's life faded and vanished away. For plainly, this miscreant had sold himself to Satan, and it would be fatal to meddle with the property of such a power as that. "Why didn't you leave? What did you want to come here for?" somebody said. "I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it," Potter moaned. "I wanted to run away. I couldn't seem to come anywhere but here." And he fell to sobbing again. Injun Joe repeated his statement just as calmly. A few minutes afterward, on the inquest, under oath, and the boys, seeing that the lightnings were still withheld, were confirmed in their belief that Joe had sold himself to the devil. He was now become, to them, the most balefully interesting object they had ever looked upon. They could not take their fascinated eyes from his face. They inwardly resolved to watch him nights, when opportunity should offer, in the hope of getting a glimpse of his dread master. Injun Joe helped to raise the body of the murdered man and put it in a wagon for removal, and it was whispered through the shuddering crowd that the wound bled a little. The boys thought that this happy circumstance would turn suspicion in the right direction, but they were disappointed. More than one villager remarked it was within 3 feet of Muff Potter when it done it. Tom's fearful secret and gnawing conscience disturbed his sleep for as much as a week after this, and at breakfast one morning Sid said, "Tom, you pitch around and talk in your sleep so much that you keep me awake half the time." Tom blanched and dropped his eyes. "It's a bad sign," said Aunt Polly gravely. "What you got on your mind, Tom?" Nothing to I know of." But the boy's hand shook so that he spilled his coffee. "And you do talk such stuff," Sid said. "Last night you said, 'It's blood, it's blood, that's what it is.' You said that over and over, and you said, 'Don't torment me so, I'll tell.' Tell what? What is it you'll tell?" Everything was swimming before Tom. There is no telling what might have happened now, but luckily the concern passed out of Aunt Polly's face, and she came to Tom's relief without knowing it. She said, "Sho! It's that dreadful murder. I dream about it most every night myself. Sometimes I dream it's me that done it." Mary said she had been affected much the same way. Sid seemed satisfied. Tom got out of the presence as quick as he plausibly could, and after that he complained of toothache for a week, and tied up his jaws every night. He never knew that Sid lay nightly watching, and frequently slipped the bandage free and then leaned on his elbow listening a good while at a time, and afterward slipped the bandage back to its place again. Tom's distress of mind wore off gradually, and the toothache grew irksome and was discarded. If Sid really managed to make anything out of Tom's disjointed mutterings, he kept it to himself. It seemed to Tom that his schoolmates would never get done holding inquests on dead cats, and thus, keeping his trouble present to his mind, Sid noticed that Tom never was coroner at one of these inquiries, though it had been his habit to take the lead in all new enterprises. He noticed, too, that Tom never acted as a witness, and that was strange. And Sid did not overlook the fact that Tom even showed a marked aversion to these inquests, and always avoided them when he could. Sid marveled, but said nothing. However, Even inquests went out of vogue at last, and ceased to torture Tom's conscience. Every day or two, during this time of sorrow, Tom watched his opportunity, and went to the little grated jail window, and smuggled such small comforts through to the murderer as he could get hold of. The jail was a trifling little brick den that stood in a marsh at the edge of the village, and no guards were afforded to it. Indeed, it was seldom occupied. These offerings greatly helped to ease Tom's conscience. The villagers had a strong desire to tar and feather Injun Joe and ride him on a rail for body snatching, but so formidable was his character that nobody could be found who was willing to take the lead in the matter. So it was dropped. He had been careful to begin with, of both his inquest statements with the fight, without confessing the grave robbery that preceded it. Therefore it was deemed wisest not to try the case in the courts at present. And that brings us to the end of chapter 11. So Injun Joe has definitely come all in on condemning poor Muff Potter. Of course, can't really say poor too much, because he was party to the whole incident, and was fighting with the doctor, and yes, so he's not innocent of everything, but he is innocent of the murder. There's a fine line there. Alright, let's continue now with chapter 12. One of the reasons Tom's mind had drifted away from its recent troubles was that it had found a new and weighty matter to interest itself about. Becky Thatcher had stopped coming to school. Tom had struggled with his pride a few days and tried to whistle her down the wind, but failed. He began to find himself hanging around her father's house nights and feeling very miserable. She was ill. What if she should die? There was distraction in the thought. He no longer took an interest in war, nor even piracy. The charm of life was gone. There was nothing but dreariness left. He put his hoop away, and his bat. There was no joy in them anymore. His aunt was concerned. She began to try all manner of remedies on him. She was one of those people who are infatuated with patent medicines and all newfangled methods of producing health or mending it. She was an inveterate experimenter in these things. When something fresh in this line came out, she was in a fever right away to try it. Not on herself, for she was never ailing, but on anybody else that came handy. She was a subscriber for all the health periodicals and phrenological frauds, and the solemn ignorance they were inflated with was breath to her nostrils. All the rot they contained about ventilation and how to go to bed and how to get up and what to eat and what to drink and how much exercise to take and what frame of mind to keep oneself in and what sort of clothing to wear was all gospel to her. And she never observed that her health journals of the current month customarily upset everything they had recommended the month before. She was as simple-hearted and honest as the day was long, and so she was an easy victim. She gathered together her quack periodicals and her quack medicines, and thus armed with death, went about on her pale horse, metaphorically speaking, with hell following after. But she never suspected that she was not an angel of healing and the balm of Gilead in disguise to the suffering neighbors. The water treatment was new now, and Tom's low condition was a windfall to her. She had him out at daylight every morning, stood him up in the woodshed and drowned him with a deluge of cold water, and then she scrubbed him down with a towel like a file, and so brought him to. And then she rolled him up in a wet sheet and put him away under blankets, till she sweated his soul clean and the yellow stains of it came through his pores, as Tom said. Yet, notwithstanding all this, the boy grew more and more melancholy and pale and dejected. She added hot baths, sitz baths, shower baths, and plunges. The boy remained as dismal as a hearse. She began to assist the water with a slim oatmeal diet and blister plasters. She calculated his capacity as she would a jug's and filled him up every day with quack cure-alls. Tom had become indifferent to persecution by this time. This phase filled the old lady's heart with consternation. This indifference must be broken up at any cost. Now, she heard of painkiller for the first time. She ordered a lot at once. She tasted it and was filled with gratitude. It was simply fire in liquid form. She dropped the water treatment and everything else and pinned her faith to painkiller. She gave Tom a teaspoonful and watched with the deepest anxiety for the result. Her troubles were instantly at rest, her soul at peace again, for the indifference was broken up. The boy could not have shown a wilder or heartier interest if she had built a fire under him. Tom felt that it was time to wake up. This sort of life might be romantic enough in his blighted condition, but it was getting to have too little sentiment and too much distracting variety about it. So he thought over various plans for relief, and finally hit upon that of professing to be fond of painkiller. He asked for it so often that he became a nuisance, and his aunt ended by telling him to help himself and quit bothering her. If it had been Sid, she would have had no misgivings to alloy her delight, but since it was Tom, she watched the bottle clandestinely. She found that the medicine did really diminish, but it did not occur to her that the boy was mending the health of a crack in the sitting room floor with it. One day, Tom was in the act of dosing the crack when his aunt's yellow cat came along purring, eyeing the teaspoon avariciously, and begging for a taste. Tom said, "Don't ask for it unless you want it, Peter." But Peter signified that he did want it. "You better make sure." Peter was sure. "Now you ask for it, and I'll give it to you, because there ain't anything mean about me. But if you find you don't like it, you mustn't blame anybody but your own self." Peter was agreeable. So Tom pried his mouth open and poured down the painkiller. Peter sprang a couple of yards in the air and then delivered a war whoop and set off round and round the room, banging against furniture, upsetting flower pots, and making general havoc. Next he rose on his hind feet and pranced about in a frenzy of enjoyment, with his head over his shoulder and his voice proclaiming his unappeasable happiness. Then he went tearing around the house again, spreading chaos and destruction in his path. Aunt Polly entered in time to see him throw a few double somersets. Finally, deliver a final mighty hurrah and sail through the open window, carrying the rest of the flower pots with him. The old lady stood petrified with astonishment. Peering over her glasses, Tom lay on the floor expiring with laughter. "Tom, what on earth ails that cat?" "I don't know, Aunt," gasped the boy. "Why, I never see anything like it. What did make him act so?" "Indeed, I don't know, Aunt Polly. Cats always act so when they're having a good time." "They do they?" There was something in the tone that made Tom apprehensive. "Yes'm. That is, I believe they do." "You do?" "Yes'm." The old lady was bending down, Tom watching, with interest emphasized by anxiety. Too late, he divined her drift. The handle of the telltale teaspoon was visible under the bed valance. Aunt Polly took it, held it up. Tom winced and dropped his eyes. Aunt Polly raised him by the usual handle, his ear, and cracked his head soundly with her thimble. "Now, sir, what did you want to treat that poor dumb beast so for?" "I done it out of pity for him, because he hadn't any aunt." "Hadn't any aunt? You numbskull! What has he got to do that? What has that got to do with it?" "Heaps, because if he'd had one, she'd have burnt him out of herself. She'd have roasted his bowels out of him without any more feeling than if he was a human." Aunt Polly felt a sudden pang of remorse. This was putting the thing in a new light. What was cruelty to a cat might be cruelty to a boy, too. She began to soften. She felt sorry. Her eyes watered a little, and she put her hand on Tom's head and said gently, "I was meaning for the best, Tom. And, Tom, it did do you good." Tom looked up in her face with just a perceptible twinkle peeping through his gravity. "I know you was meaning for the best, Auntie. And so was I with Peter. It done him good, too. I never seen him get around so since. Oh, go along with you, Tom, before you aggravate me again. You try and see if you can't be a good boy for once. You needn't take any more medicine." Tom reached school ahead of time. It was noticed that this strange thing had been occurring every day latterly. And now, as usual of late, he hung about the gate of the schoolyard instead of playing with his comrades. He was sick, he said, and he looked it. He tried to seem to be looking everywhere, but whither he really was looking, down the road. Presently, Jeff Thatcher hove in sight, and Tom's face lighted. He gazed a moment, and then turned sorrowfully away. When Jeff arrived, Tom accosted him and led up, warily, to opportunities for remark about Becky. But the giddy lad never could see the bait. Tom watched and watched, hoping whenever a frisking frock came in sight, and hating the owner of it as soon as he saw she was not the right one. At last, frocks ceased to appear, and he dropped hopelessly into the dumps. He entered the empty schoolhouse and sat down to suffer. Then one more frock passed in at the gate, and Tom's heart gave a great bound. The next instant he was out and going on like an Indian, yelling, laughing, chasing boys, jumping over the fence at risk of life and limb, throwing handsprings, standing on his head, doing all the heroic things he could conceive of, and keeping a furtive eye out, all the while, to see if Becky Thatcher was noticing. But she seemed to be unconscious of it all. She never looked. Could it be possible that she was not aware that he was there? He carried his exploits to her immediate vicinity, came war-whooping around, snatched a boy's cap, hurried it to the roof of the schoolhouse, broke through a group of boys, tumbling them in every direction, and fell sprawling himself under Becky's nose, almost upsetting her, and she turned, with her nose in the air, and he heard her say, "Huh! Some people think they're mighty smart, always showing off." Tom's cheeks burned. He gathered himself and sneaked off, crushed and crestfallen. That brings us to the end of chapter 12. Yeah, so Aunt Polly getting in on all the fad medicines was not unusual for the time, and you know what? It's something about just old ladies that just get it in their head that, follow the trends. It must be new. If it's new, it must work. Otherwise, why'd they make it? Right? And once more, we are reminded that times may change, but people don't really. Otherwise, why is Dr. Phil a thing? Or Maury, or any of those? They'd never catch on if there weren't dupes. It's just the way of it. All right, let's continue now with chapter 13. Tom's mind was made up now. He was gloomy and desperate. He was forsaken, friendless boy. He said nobody loved him. When they found out what they had driven him to, perhaps they would be sorry. He had tried to do right and get along, but they would not let him, since nothing would do them but to be rid of him. Let it be so, and let them blame him for the consequences. Why shouldn't they? What right had the friendless to complain? Yes, they had forced him to it at last. He would lead a life of crime. There was no choice. By this time, he was far down Meadow Lane, and the bell for school to take up tinkled faintly upon his ear. He sobbed now, to think he should never hear that old familiar sound anymore. It was very hard, but it was forced on him. Since he was driven out into the cold world, he must submit. But he forgave them. Then the sobs came thick and fast. Mark Twain does melodrama really, really well. This is just a lot of fun. Just at this point, he met his soul's sworn comrade, Joe Harper, hard-eyed and with, evidently, a great and dismal purpose in his heart. Plainly, here were two souls with but a single thought. Tom, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, began to blubber out something about a resolution to escape from the hard usage and lack of sympathy at home by roaming abroad into the great world, never to return, and ended by hoping that Joe would not forget him. But it transpired that this was a request which Joe had just been going to make of Tom, and had come to hunt him up for that purpose. His mother had whipped him for drinking some cream which he had never tasted and knew nothing about. It was plain that she was tired of him and wished him to go. If she felt that way, there was nothing for him to do but succumb. He hoped she would be happy and never regret having driven her poor boy out into the unfeeling world to suffer and die. As the two boys walked sorrowing along, they made a new compact to stand by each other and be brothers and never separate till death relieved them of their troubles. Then they began to lay their plans. Joe was for being a hermit and living on crusts in a remote cave and dying, sometime, of cold and want and grief. But after listening to Tom, he conceded that there were some conspicuous advantages about a life of crime, and so he consented to be a pirate. 3 miles below St. Petersburg, at a point where the Mississippi River was a trifle over a mile wide, there was a long, narrow, wooded island with a shallow bar at the head of it, and this offered well as a rendezvous. It was not inhabited. It lay far over toward the further shore, abreast a dense and almost wholly unpeopled forest. So Jackson's Island was chosen. Who were to be the subjects of their piracies was a matter that did not occur to them. Then they hunted up Huckleberry Finn, and he joined them promptly, for all careers were one to him. He was indifferent. They presently separated to meet at a lonely spot on the riverbank, 2 miles above the village, at the favorite hour, which was midnight. There was a small log raft there which they meant to capture. Each would bring hooks and lines and such provision as he could steal in the most dark and mysterious way, as became outlaws. And before the afternoon was done, they had all managed to enjoy the sweet glory of spreading the fact that pretty soon the town would hear something. All who got this vague hint were cautioned to be mum and wait. About midnight, Tom arrived with a boiled ham and a few trifles, and stopped in a dense undergrowth on a small bluff overlooking the meeting place. It was starlight and very still. The mighty river lay like an ocean at rest. Tom listened a moment, but no sound disturbed the quiet. Then he gave a low, distinct whistle. It was answered from under the bluff. Tom whistled twice more. These signals were answered in the same way. Then a guarded voice said, "Who goes there?" "Tom Sawyer, the Black Avenger of the Spanish Main. Name your names." "Huck Finn, the Red-Handed, and Joe Harper, the Terror of the Seas." Tom had furnished these titles from his favorite literature. "'Tis well. Give the countersign." 2 hoarse whispers delivered the same awful words simultaneously to the brooding night. "Blood." Then Tom tumbled his ham over the bluff and let himself down after it, tearing both skin and clothes to some extent in the effort. There was an easy, comfortable path along the shore under the bluff, but it lacked the advantages of difficulty and danger so valued by a pirate. The terror of the seas had brought a side of bacon, and had about worn himself out with getting it there. Finn the Red-Handed had stolen a skillet and a quantity of half-cured leaf tobacco, and had also brought a few corn cobs to make pipes with, but none of the pirates smoked or chewed but himself. The Black Avenger of the Spanish Main said it would never do to start without some fire. That was a wise thought. Matches were hardly known there in that day. So they saw a fire smoldering upon a great raft 100 yards above, and they went stealthily thither and helped themselves to a chunk. They made an imposing adventure of it, saying, "Heist!" every now and then, and suddenly halting with finger on lip, and moving with hands on imaginary dagger hilts and giving orders in dismal whispers that if the foe stirred, to let him have it to the hilt, because dead men tell no tales. They knew well enough that the raftsmen were all down at the village, laying in stores or having a spree, but still, that was no excuse for their conducting this thing in an unpiratical way. They shoved off presently, Tom in command, Huck at the after oar, and Joe at the forward. Tom stood amidships, gloomy browed with folded arms, and gave his orders in a low, stern whisper. "Luff, and bring her to the wind." "Aye, sir." "Steady, steady." "Steady it is, sir." "Let her go off a point." "Point it is, sir." As the boys steadily and monotonously drove the raft toward midstream, it was no doubt understood that these orders were given only for style, and were not intended to mean anything in particular. "What sail she carrying?" "Courses, topsails, and flying jib, sir." "Send the royals up. Lay aloft there, half dozen of ye. Fore top matsons, lively now." "Aye, sir." "Shake out that maintocalancel. Sheets and braces. Now, my hearties." "Aye, sir." "Helm a lee. Hard a port. Stand by to meet her when she comes. Port, port, now, men." "With a will, steady." "Steady it is, sir." The raft drew beyond the middle of the river. The boys pointed her head right, and then lay on their oars. The river was not high, nor was there not more than 2 or 3 mile current. Hardly a word was said during the next 3/4 of an hour. Now, the raft was passing before the distant town. 2 or 3 glimmering lights showed where it lay, peacefully sleeping, beyond the vague, vast sweep of the star-gemmed water, unconscious of the tremendous event that was happening. The Black Avenger stood still with folded arms, looking his last upon the scene of his former joys and his later sufferings, and wishing she could see him now, abroad on the wild sea, facing peril and death with dauntless heart, going to his doom with a grim smile on his lips. It was but a small strain on his imagination to remove Jackson's Island beyond eyeshot of the village, and so he looked his last with a broken and satisfied heart. The other pirates were looking their last too, and they all looked so long that they came near letting the current drift them out of the range of the island. But they discovered the danger in time, and made shift to avert it. About 2 o'clock in the morning, the raft grounded on the bar 200 yards above the head of the island, and they waded back and forth until they had landed her freight. Part of the little raft's belongings consisted of an old sail, and this they spread over a nook in the bushes for a tent to shelter their provisions. But they themselves would sleep in the open air in good weather, as became outlaws. They built a fire against the side of a great log 20 or 30 steps within the somber depths of the forest, and then cooked some bacon in the frying pan for supper, and used up half of the corn pone stock they had brought. It seemed glorious sport to be feasting in that wild, free way in the virgin forest of an unexplored and uninhabited island, far from the haunts of men. And they said they never would return to civilization. The climbing fire lit up their faces and threw its ruddy glare upon the pillared tree trunks of their forest temple and upon the varnished foliage of the festooning vines. When the last crisp slice of bacon was gone, and the last allowance of corn pone devoured, the boys stretched themselves out on the grass, filled with contentment. They could have found a cooler place, but they would not deny themselves such romantic feature as the roasting campfire. "Ain't it gay?" said Joe. "It's nuts," said Tom. "What would the boys say if they could see us?" "Say? Well, they'd just die to be here. Hey, Hucky." "I reckon so," said Huckleberry. "Anyways, I'm suited. I don't want nothing better than this, and I don't ever get enough to eat generally. And here they can't come and pick at a feller and bullyrag himself." "It's just the life for me," said Tom. "You don't have to get up mornings. You don't have to go to school and wash and all that blamed foolishness. You see, a pirate don't have to do anything, Joe, when he's ashore. But a hermit, he has to be praying considerable, and then he don't get any fun anyway, all by himself that way." "Oh, yes, that's so," said Joe. "But I hadn't thought much about it, you know. I'd a good deal rather be a pirate now that I tried it." "You see," said Tom, "people don't go much on hermits nowadays, like they used to in old times. But a pirate's always respected, and a hermit's got to sleep in the hardest place he can find. Put sackcloth and ashes on his head, and stand out in the rain, and what does he have to put sackcloth and ashes on his head for?" cried Huck. "I don't know, but they've got to do it. Hermits always do. You'd have to do that if you was a hermit." "Darned if I wouldn't," said Huck. "Well, what would you do?" "I don't know. I wouldn't do that." "Why, Huck, you'd have to. How'd you get around it?" "Why, I just wouldn't stand it. I'd run away." "Run away? Well, you would be a nice old slouch of a hermit. You'd be a disgrace." The red-handed made no response. Being better employed, he had finished gouging out a cob, and now he fitted a weed stem to it, loaded it with tobacco, and was pressing a coal to the charge and blowing a cloud of fragrant smoke. He was in the full bloom of luxurious contentment. The other pirates envied him this majestic vice, and secretly resolved to acquire it shortly. Presently, Huck said, "What does pirates have to do?" Tom said, "Oh, they have just a bully time. Take ships and burn them. Get the money and bury it in awful places in their island where there's ghosts and things to watch it. And kill everybody in the ships. Make them walk a plank. And they carry the women to the island," said Joe. "They don't kill the women." "No," said Tom. "They don't kill the women. They're too noble. And the women's always beautiful, too." "And don't they wear the bulliest clothes?" "Oh, no, all gold and silver and diamonds," said Joe with enthusiasm. "Who?" "Why, the pirates." Huck scanned his own clothing forlornly. "I reckon I ain't dressed fitting for a pirate," said he, with a regretful pathos in his voice. "I ain't got none but these." But the other boys told him the fine clothes would come fast enough, after they should have begun their adventures. They made him understand that his poor rags would do to begin with, though it was customary for wealthy pirates to start with a proper wardrobe. Gradually, their talk died out, and drowsiness began to steal upon the eyelids of the little waifs. The pipe dropped from the fingers of the red-handed, and he slept the sleep of the conscience-free and the wary. The terror of the seas and the black avenger of the Spanish Main had more difficulty in getting to sleep. They said their prayers inwardly, and, lying down, since there was nobody there with authority to make them kneel and recite aloud, in truth, they had a mind not to say them at all, but they were afraid to proceed to such lengths as that, lest they might call down a sudden and special thunderbolt from heaven. Then at once they reached down and hovered upon the imminent verge of sleep. But an intruder came, now that would not down. It was conscience. They began to feel a vague fear that they had been doing wrong to run away, and next they thought of the stolen meat. And then the real torture came. They tried to argue it away by reminding Conscience that they had purloined sweetmeats and apples scores of times, but Conscience was not to be appeased by such thin plausibilities. It seemed to him, in the end, that there was no getting around the stubborn fact that taking sweetmeats was only hooking, while taking bacon and hams and such valuables was plain and simple stealing. And there was a command against that in the Bible. So they inwardly resolved that so long as they remained in the business, their piracies should not again be sullied with the crime of stealing. Then Conscience granted a truce, and these curiously inconsistent pirates fell peacefully to sleep. These are the sorts of pirates you find in One Piece. Let's be real. There's not a whole lot of pillaging, plundering, and pirating going on. It's more just being out on your own. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 13. These are pretty quick chapters. We are making very good progress here. I'd say we're actually about 40% through already. So, let's go ahead and get, all 13,000 episodes of it. I will readily admit, I'm caught up. But, to also be fair, I've been keeping up with it since I was in school, years and years and years and years ago. So, it's a little bit of a different stance. To catch up now, it's a hard recommendation. It is. There's just so much. So much. But if you're already caught up, or if you've got 2 weeks and no plans, it's pretty good. All right. Let's continue now with chapter 14. When Tom awoke in the morning, he wondered where he was. He sat up and rubbed his eyes and looked around. Then he comprehended. It was the cool gray dawn. There was a delicious sense of repose and peace in the deep, pervading calm and silence of the woods. Not a leaf stirred. Not a sound obtruded upon great nature's meditation. Beaded dewdrops stood upon the leaves and grasses. A white layer of ashes covered the fire, and a thin blue breath of smoke rose straight into the air. Joe and Huck still slept. Now, far away in the woods, a bird called. Another answered. Presently, the hammering of a woodpecker was heard. Gradually, the cool, dim gray of the morning whitened. And as gradually sounds multiplied and life manifested itself, the marvel of nature shaking off sleep and going to work unfolded itself to the musing boy. A little green worm came crawling over a dewy leaf, lifting 2/3 of his body into the air from time to time, and sniffing around, then proceeding again. For he was measuring, Tom said, and when the worm approached him of its own accord, he sat still as stone, with his hopes rising and falling by turns as the creature still came toward him, or seemed inclined to go elsewhere. And when at last it considered a painful moment, with its curved body in the air, and then came decisively down upon Tom's leg and began a journey over him, his whole heart was glad. For that meant that he was going to have a new suit of clothes, without the shadow of a doubt, a gaudy, piratical uniform. Now a procession of ants appeared, from nowhere in particular, and went about their labors. One struggled manfully by with a dead spider, 5 times as big as itself in its arms, and lugged it straight up a tree trunk. A brown-spotted ladybug climbed the dizzy height of a grass blade, and Tom bent down close to it and said, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire, your children's alone." And she took wing and went off to see about it, which did not surprise the boy, for he knew of old that this insect was credulous about conflagrations, and he had practiced upon its simplicity more than once. A tumblebug came next, heaving sturdily at its ball. and Tom touched the creature to see it shut its legs against his body and pretend to be dead. The birds were fairly rioting by this time. A catbird, the northern mocker, lit in a tree over Tom's head and trilled out her imitations of her neighbors in a rapture of enjoyment. Then a shrill jay swept down, a flash of blue flame, and stopped on a twig almost within the boy's reach, cocked his head to one side, and eyed the strangers with a consuming curiosity. A gray squirrel and a big fellow of the fox kind came scurrying along, sitting up at intervals to inspect and chatter at the boys, for the wild things had probably never seen a human being before, and scarcely knew whether to be afraid or not. All nature was wide and awake and stirring now. Long lances of sunlight pierced down through the dense foliage, far and near, and a few butterflies came fluttering upon the scene. Tom stirred up the other pirates, and they all clattered away with a shout, and in a minute or two were stripped and chasing after and tumbling over each other in the shallow, limpid water of the white sandbar. They felt no longing for the little village sleeping in the distance beyond the majestic waste of water. A vagrant current or slight rise in the river had carried off their raft, but this only gratified them, since its going was something like burning the bridge between them and civilization. They came back to camp wonderfully refreshed, glad-hearted and ravenous, and they soon had the campfire blazing up again. Huck found a spring of clear, cold water close by, and the boys made cups of broad oak or hickory leaves, and felt that water, sweetened with such a wildwood charm as that, would be a good enough substitute for coffee. While Joe was slicing bacon for breakfast, Tom and Huck asked him to hold on a minute. They stepped to a promising nook in the riverbank and threw in their lines. Almost immediately, they had reward. Joe had not had time to get impatient before they were back again with some handsome bass, a couple of sunperch, and a small catfish. Provisions enough for quite a family. They fried the fish with the bacon and were astonished, for no fish had ever seemed so delicious before. They did not know that the quicker a freshwater fish is on the fire after he is caught, the better he is, and they reflected little upon that what a sauce open-air sleeping upon open-air exercise, bathing, and a large ingredient of hunger make, too. They lay around in the shade after breakfast, while Huck had a smoke, and then went off through the woods on an exploring expedition. They tramped gaily along over decaying logs, through tangled underbrush, among solemn monarchs of the forest, hung from their crowns to the ground with a drooping regalia of grapevines. Now and then they came upon snug nooks carpeted with grass and jeweled with flowers. They found plenty of things to be delighted with, but nothing to be astonished at. They discovered that the island was about 3 miles long and a quarter of a mile wide, and that at the shore it lay closest to was only separated from it by a narrow channel, hardly 200 yards wide. They took a swim about every hour, so it was close upon the middle of the afternoon when they got back to camp. They were too hungry to stop to fish, but they fared sumptuously upon cold ham, and then threw themselves down in the shade to talk. But the talk soon began to drag, and then died. The stillness, the solemnity that brooded in the woods, and the sense of loneliness began to tell upon the spirits of the boys. They fell to thinking. A sort of undefined longing crept upon them. This took dim shape presently. It was budding homesickness. Even Finn the Red-Handed was dreaming of his doorsteps and empty hogsheads. But they were all ashamed of their weakness, and none was brave enough to speak his thought. For some time now, the boys had been dully conscious of a peculiar sound in the distance, just as one sometimes is of the ticking of a clock when he takes no distinct note of. But now this mysterious sound became more pronounced and forced a recognition. The boys started, glanced at each other, and then each assumed a listening attitude. There was a long silence, profound and unbroken. Then a deep, sullen boom came floating down out of the distance. "What is it?" exclaimed Joe under his breath. "I wonder," said Tom in a whisper. "'Tain't thunder," said Huckleberry in an odd tone, "because thunder—" "What?" said Tom. "Listen, don't talk." They waited a time that seemed an age, and then the same muffled boom troubled the solemn hush. "Let's go and see." They sprang to their feet and hurried to the shore toward the town. They parted the bushes on the bank and peered out over the water. The little steam ferryboat was about a mile below the village, drifting with the current. Her broad deck seemed crowded with people. There were a great many skiffs rowing about her, floating with the stream in the neighborhood of the ferryboat. But the boys could not determine what the men in them were doing. Presently, a great jet of white smoke burst from the ferryboat's side, and as it expanded and rose in a lazy cloud, that same dull throb of sound was borne to the listeners again. "I know now," exclaimed Tom. "Somebody's drowned." "That's it," said Huck. "They done that last summer when Bill Turner got drowned. They shoot a cannon over the water, and that makes him come up to the top. Yes, and they take loaves of bread and put quicksilver in them and set them afloat. And whenever there's anybody that's drowned, they'll float right up and stop." "Yeah, I've heard about that," said Joe. "I wonder what makes the bread do that." "Oh, it ain't the bread so much," said Tom. "I reckon it's mostly what they say over it before they started out." "But they don't say anything over it," said Huck. "I've seen them, and they don't." "Well, that's funny," said Tom. "Maybe they say it to themselves." "Of course they do. Anybody might know that." The other boys agreed that there was reason in what Tom said, because an ignorant lump of bread, uninstructed by an incantation, could not be expected to act very intelligently when set upon an errand of such gravity. "By jings, I wish I was over there now," said Joe. "I do too," said Huck. "I wish heaps to know who it is." The boys still listened and watched. Presently, a revealing thought flashed through Tom's mind, and he exclaimed, "Boys, I know who's drowned. It's us." They felt like heroes in an instant. There was a gorgeous triumph. They were missed. They were mourned. Hearts were breaking on their account. Tears were being shed, accusing memories of unkindness to these poor lost lads were rising up. And unavailing regrets and remorse were being indulged. And best of all, the departed were the talk of the whole town, and the envy of all the boys as far as this dazzling notoriety was concerned. This was fine. It was worthwhile to be a pirate after all. You know, I don't think I've ever been on a steamboat. It's not the sort of thing that, I guess you need to go out looking for it. It's not something that just happens. You need to be at a reasonably big river. So, it makes sense. But, cool. As twilight drew on, the ferryboat went back to her accustomed business, and the skiffs disappeared. The pirates returned to camp. They were jubilant with vanity over their new grandeur and the illustrious trouble they were making. They caught fish, cooked supper and ate it, and then fell to guessing at what the village was thinking and saying about them. And the pictures they drew of the public distress on their account were gratifying to look upon, from their point of view. But when the shadows of night closed them in, they gradually ceased to talk and sat gazing into the fire, with their minds evidently wandering elsewhere. The excitement was gone now, and Tom and Joe could not keep back thoughts of certain persons at home who were not enjoying this fine frolic as much as they were. Misgivings came. They grew troubled and unhappy. A sigh or two escaped unawares. By and by, Joe timidly ventured upon a roundabout feeler as to how the others might look upon a return to civilization. Not right now, but... Tom withered him with derision. Huck, being uncommitted as yet, joined in with Tom, and the waverer quickly explained that Ed was glad to get out of the scrape with as little taint of chicken-hearted homesickness clinging to his garments as he could. mutiny was effectually laid to rest for the moment. As night deepened, Huck began to nod, and presently to snore. Joe followed next. Tom lay upon his elbow motionless for some time, watching the two intently. At last, he got up cautiously on his knees and went searching among the grass and the flickering reflections flung by the campfire. He picked up and inspected several large semi-cylinders of the thin white bark of the sycamore, and finally chose two which seemed to suit him. Then he knelt by the fire and painfully wrote something upon each of these with his red keel. One he rolled up and put in his jacket pocket, and the other he put in Joe's hat and removed it a little distance from the owner. And also he put into the hat certain schoolboy treasures of almost inestimable value. Among them, a lump of chalk, an India rubber ball, 3 fish hooks, and one of the kind of marbles known as sure enough crystal. And then he tiptoed his way cautiously among the trees, till he felt that he was out of hearing, and straightway broke into a keen run in the direction of the sandbar. And that is the end of chapter 14. You know, now that you mentioned that some are casinos, they're round about here that there's, you know, in a lot of these red states, there's very strict gambling laws on certain things. And one of the things was that there couldn't be any casinos on land. So they had to be on boats. So a lot of the casinos were just boats that were in the river, forever docked. They couldn't actually go anywhere, but it was just a boat on the river, and it was a casino. So not quite a steamboat, but that's what it is. Can't be gambling on ground, but you know, a boat that never moves might as well be ground. Totally works. Loopholes. Well, so this has been a fun few chapters we've gotten through. We've seen the boys wander off and have their bit of wild living, and it's more authentic than Thoreau's wild living. I'll give them that already. But we'll have to wonder how long until they give in, because these lads are not quite the real country sort. Yeah, the reservations are pretty common too, where that's because they're their own jurisdictions, so they make their own rules there. So yeah, that meshes. We've got a shared understanding of that. But all right, well, we are right on time actually. So let's go ahead and wrap up here for the night. We've had the boyish wanderings, the playing and make-believe, the getting up to trouble, the melancholy and melodrama that Twain is just so good at making fit and just seem real. This is the sort of shared experience that, yes, this is set in the early 1800s, but I think it's around like 1820 or so it's set. 1820 or 1840. So well before the Civil War. But despite the setting, it might as well be today out in the sticks. A little less internet, but the people are every bit as real, and kids getting up to the same sort of trouble and issues. And yeah, you're right. He captures it so well. It makes me remember going off on a bike and heading out into the woods back beyond the neighborhood and finding some creeks and going catching tadpoles and stuff like that. Like, it just, you remember that sort of thing. And it's just like, okay, yeah. All of these adventures and misadventures that the boys are getting up to, aside from witnessing a murder, are very, very relatable. It's like we've all done things like that and gotten up into trouble and just wandered off and come back sometimes well past night. It's just normal. That's the fun. So I'm going to keep enjoying this, and we're making very good progress, so there's not a whole lot of this left. And yeah, Twain writes people so well, so believable. And a lot of it is as he's said, Tom Sawyer is based on basically three different real boys and their real experiences growing up in a small deep South Mississippi town. So it's understandable that he writes good characters because they're based in experience. You write what you know, and Twain knows people, and it just keeps on giving. It's one of those timeless things that he's well known for and will always be well known for because he's just fun to read. Like, there's a reason they have you read Mark Twain in school. I think it was high school when I read Huck Finn, but I mean, the target audience is for not necessarily children, but young people. But Twain does say very well that he hopes that the old folks can recapture some of their youth in reading it as well, which, that's what I'm hitting here. It might be a book for kids, but it's very nostalgic, and I'm enjoying that aspect of it very much. So, all right, let's go ahead and call it a wrap for tonight. I need to get some order in for dinner because I've neglected to eat at all today. It's funny how that happens. And I need to hurry before things close because, don't you know it, ever since COVID, nothing's open forever anymore. Now, once 11 o'clock rolls around, everything is closed. Everything's done. So, I need to get out of here. So, with that, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you're having fun with this. I certainly am. Yeah. So, let's go ahead and call it an evening. So thank you very much for joining us. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to drop a like on the stream, maybe subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back for more of this next time. We'll resume from chapter 15 tomorrow night of Tom Sawyer. Until next time, thank you very much, and have a wonderful night.